Hey, how are you doing? I'm Joe Dallas. Let's talk about how to have a conversation with a loved one who is what we would call woke. Someone you love is someone who's woke. Holidays coming up. It's Christmas dinner, and you're just wanting to enjoy your family and friends, your loved ones, having a good time, and then something comes up. Maybe the last election, that's on everybody's mind for sure. National policies, what have you. And you can feel the tension starting, and you don't want to fight, but you also don't want to back down. You don't want to be phony. So now what? Let's talk about that. How do we have dinner conversations with friends or loved ones who are coming from a woke mindset? Before we get into that, now let me remind you, if you haven't yet subscribed to our podcast here, please hit the bell there. We would love to have you be a part of this community. Also, if you want to know more about Cloudfire Ministries, look over the website here, joedallas.com. Okay? Get to know us. All right. Holiday season, and things get tense when the conversation turns to, it could be whatever, racism, election, LGBTQ, gender issues, whatever. Principle to keep in mind, okay? Relate and represent. Relate and represent. Remember, you're a disciple of Jesus Christ. You're not just a believer in Jesus Christ, which is good. That's necessary for salvation, but you're a follower. You're not content to just say, I believe all the right things. You're trying to follow him, and one of the ways you try to follow him is you try to conduct yourself in Christ-like ways. You relate and you represent. Relate. That means, like Paul told the Romans 12:18, as much as lieth within you, as much as is possible, be at peace with all people. You want to relate, okay? That means you want to get along. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with wanting to get along. That's not what they call men pleasing. You're doing men pleasing, when getting along is your top priority above everything else. If you'll get along at the expense of integrity, you're getting along at the expense of being honest, and now you got a man pleasing problem, a people pleasing problem. But if you just want to get along, why not? Of course. And Paul said you should as much as possible. Relate and represent. Okay. So you remember Paul described us, 2 Corinthians 5:20, as ambassadors for Christ. If you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, you're as an ambassador for Christ. Paul also said, 1 Corinthians 4:1, let a person so account of us as ministers of the gospel of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Okay? So you want to represent him well as a steward of truth. You want to relate, you want to represent. If you want to relate well and you want to represent well, one of the things you got to do, try to understand some of the cultural influences that are affecting the people that you're dealing with. That would be true if you were in another nation, if you were in another culture. And in a way, our culture has largely been influenced by what we now call woke. We throw that word around a lot, don't we? Merriam-Webster defines woke as, quote, aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. Aware of and actively attentive to important issues of race and social justice. Well, that's a little vague, isn't it? I mean, my idea of racial justice and social justice may be different than your idea. And so, what woke means specifically is that you are attuned to a rather new version of racial and social justice. Now, the word itself isn't all that new. I thought this was interesting. I found the earliest use, at least I could find, goes back to like 1938, and African-American folk writer named Huddie Ledbetter uh, had a song called Scottsboro Boys, in which he said, "Stay woke," basically talking about the injustice of these young men who had been falsely accused of rape. Now, intermittently through the 60s and 70s, it's been used again primarily in relation to racial issues. And then in the last decade or so, a little more than a decade, it's been broadened. Now it includes um, not just racial issues, but gender issues, LGBTQ, feminism, immigration, any number of social issues. So woke is basically a new approach to justice and basically righteousness, especially when it comes to social issues. And while there's not a uniform definition that will apply to every situation, that basically woke is an approach that says, I have had an awakening to the importance of certain issues, and I now have a new way of viewing those issues. Now, you probably know someone has been affected by woke ideology if they then have these new definitions of justice. For example, a new definition of racism. Me, and I think many others like me, we've assumed racism meant the belief in the inferiority or the superiority of a particular race. Well, nowadays, racism is applied to anyone who is the dominant race. In other words, if you're Caucasian, if you're white, you are a racist, not because you really believe other races are inferior, but because of your majority status. Whether you chose it or not, you have white privilege, and that impacts the way you view other races and other people. So, the new definition of justice, I guess that's the point. And then, of course, there's also a belief that the unconverted are the infidels. To people who are really committed to woke ideology, it's basically them versus us versus them. They basically see it as, hey, we are woke. We have the proper perspective on racism, transgender, homosexuality, immigration, feminism, et cetera, et cetera. And those who do not share our revised view of those issues, those are the unconverted, and the unconverted are the infidels. They are not enlightened. Now, these days, yeah, there's a good chance you've got a family member, a close friend, or loved one who has been influenced by woke ideology, and that ideology, why it has informed their opinion on current issues, like the recent election, like different social programs, social issues, and maybe even has a direct impact on their personal life. They themselves might be, for example, transgender or bisexual or lesbian and so forth. But not only do they hold the woke ideology, the revised view of looking at social justice, they've also been rather carefully taught that it is the morally superior viewpoint, and therefore those who are unconverted need to be either argued down or silenced. And that's where it gets tricky. See, the problem is not that someone you love is woke. The problem is that someone you love wants to argue woke stuff with you. The problem is that someone who is woke so often feels compelled to get into some kind of a power struggle with you to convince you that you are wrong and that they are right. Now, when that happens, there you are, just some, hopefully well-meaning believer who's a family member and a friend and is just trying to get along. And now you're being asked point blank, why did you vote for that person? Why don't you believe in critical race theory? Why aren't you gay affirming? Why aren't you trans affirming? Why aren't you pro-choice? And you go, whoa, okay, I am on the spot. And that's when um, the committee in your head gets going. Okay, hey, let's discuss this. We are on the spot now. Are we going to rave or are we going to cave? Those are the two options we usually think of. When you're on the spot like that, one knee-jerk reaction is to rave. Well, wait a minute. I'm not a bigot. I'm not racist. I'm not homophobic. I'm not misogynistic. I'm not a nationalist. Whatever. And I think that you're completely wrong, and I'll throw some Bible verses at you and strong arm you, and I can talk louder than you. And I mean, these are among the many problems we have today. He who yells the loudest is often declared the winner. Now, that's stupid, but it's true. It's true. A lot of people just make their points with so much emotion and so much strength, and they're so good at that what they're saying may be completely inaccurate, off the wall. They're just plain stupid. It doesn't matter. They seem to win the argument just with sheer volume. So that's the knee jerk reaction to rave. I've done it. Um, Not proud of that, but I have. I remember speaking at a conference in Salt Lake City, Utah, when a ton of gay activists, well, I mean a ton, but the majority of the people in the very large lecture hall, was a few hundred people, had come there. Just as soon as I got up to speak, they started interrupting me, shouting at me, and resorting to all sorts of intimidation tactics. It was turning into a mob scene. And that was a great opportunity for me to basically say, hey, people, I do want to hear you. I've got things to say. Let's try to be reasonable with each other. But instead, I just raved. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I said. It wasn't exactly G rated. It wasn't R rated, but it was somewhere in between. So, not proud of it. But point is, I raved. I raved because I just wanted to shut everybody up. And I did. So what? Didn't accomplish anything. Okay. It was just a bunch of I felt by the time we were done like I was one kid that had been yelling at another kid. That's one temptation to rave. Remember, James said, the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. If you're just going to intimidate somebody into winning an argument, you didn't win the argument. So you need to check your attitude. There's nothing mature about that. But there's nothing mature about caving either. Now, I've done that as well. I remember decades ago, I was a guest on, you might remember the comedian Joan Rivers. I was a guest on her television show back in the early 1990s, and I was asked on to be the sort of token Christian fundamentalist bozo, I guess. They had a gay couple on the show, and they were talking about how they were gay and Christian, and it was right with God, and I was invited on to challenge that viewpoint. And I was so into, I was representing a very large organization on that show at that time. And I was so into, now let's just make friends. Let's be polite. I want to show people I'm not homophobic. I want to be warm. I want to be gracious. Well, I was all of that. So what? I caved because I didn't say what needed to be said. When you rave, you misrepresent the heart of God. He's about mercy. But when you cave, you misrepresent the mind of God. I misrepresented the mind of God by not saying plainly, while I may love you people and while I may respect your free will, the fact is what you are doing is not biblical and it is outside of God's will. That is what I should have said plainly. And I didn't. So I caved. Those are the two temptations you're going to feel this holiday dinner if you're put in that situation. So you're on the spot now. And everybody at the table is looking at you saying, okay, you've been challenged. What are you going to do now? Okay, I want to give you 4 questions to consider. Okay, 4 questions to consider. 1, is this appropriate? That is to say, is this the time and the place to be talking about this? Paul told the Colossians, walk in wisdom toward those who are on the outside. Colossians 4:5. When you're dealing with people who are not born again believers and they're coming from completely different worldviews and so forth, you want to first of all look at the situation. Is it wise to get into this right now? We gathered as a family to enjoy each other and to look past our differences. And we want this meal to be a time where we can celebrate family and the history we have and so forth. And so, is this really appropriate? And that doesn't mean you're going to back down. For example, you'd want to say something like, look, I'm glad to talk to you about this. You want to talk about gay rights? You want to talk about critical race theory? You want to talk about abortion? What have you? Hey, those are important topics, and I would really enjoy talking with you about them. But is this really the best place? Is this appropriate? You can even check with the others at the table. Folks, is this where you want to go? I don't mind, but let's not turn it into a debate if it's going to basically interfere with what we're trying to do in enjoying each other. Okay? So you want to first ask, is this appropriate? Is this the time or the place? All right, maybe you'll determine it's not the time or the place. So just say, hey, let's you and I get together for lunch. I'd love for us to really have an hour or two to really hash this out. Or if you decide, yep, this is the time and place, it will not be disruptive or hurtful to the other people at the table. Everybody is saying they want us to discuss this. Okay. Then the next question you want to ask yourself, is this a priority? Now, when I say that, is this a priority? Meaning LGBTQ, border security, who got elected as president, critical race theory, all of these issues, they're important, but they're really not the main issue, are they? Worldview is the main issue. When Paul went to Mars Hill and he looked around and saw all these idols, all these monuments, he was like, well, okay, you got a lot of monuments to a lot of different gods, and you've got one monument to the unknown God. That's a symptom of the issue. But the real issue is there a God or is there not? Is he knowable or is he not? You see? So he looked at the priority issue. That's exactly what you want to do. You want to shift from the lesser to the broader. So I've got a relative or a close friend at the Christmas dinner table who says, hey, Joe, where do you stand on gay marriage? Do I want to jump right into saying that I don't believe 2 men can bring to the table what a man and a woman can bring to the table, that they cannot be as effective as a parenting team as the male-female combination can? I could start there, but that's kind of the secondary issue. What I would say is, well, let me kind of cut to the chase and hit the real reason I believe what I believe. I believe we have a creator. I believe our creator's intentions can be known, and I believe they can be known in this inspired document in the Bible, known as the Bible. And because of that, why that informs my position, my opinion on issues of human sexuality. Okay. So you want to kind of get to the priority issue, shift from the lesser to the broader. And that's why I will often ask somebody who wants to argue a specific social issue, okay, isn't the real issue that we have a different way of arriving at truth? I'd like to know what yours is, then let me tell you what mine is. That's a good way to get to the priority issue. Third question you want to ask, well, this is a pretty important one. Is this personal? You might have a friend or loved one at the dinner table who is openly lesbian or gay or transgender or what have you. Maybe the woman arguing about abortion is someone who has had an abortion. So that's a good time to ask now, is the problem that we disagree, or is the problem that you see my disagreement with you as an affront to you? Let's try to get past that before we go any further. Is the problem just that we're having a disagreement because you seem to be very angry or very hurt because of my position? What I want to know is that because it is a personal issue? If you feel as though my disagreement with you is an affront to you, I'd ask you to consider the fact that in every relationship, there's areas we disagree on. So can't we do that without feeling as though we are an affront to each other? And I'm very open to hearing from you. Is the problem my position or my posture? Do you feel I come across as like self-righteous, judgmental, holier than thou? Because if that's the problem, then the problem is me. But if the problem is my position, I can't apologize for that. But I would like to know if this is a personal issue, because I don't want to be walking all over your sensitivities and talking about this. And then finally, fourth question, after you've established those first three or answered those first three, is this reasonable? Is this reasonable? Okay, so first, is this appropriate? Second, is this priority? Third, is this personal? Fourth, finally, is this, first of all, something we can reason about? And secondly, is it something we can reason about with a reasonable tone? Becomes kind of an apologetics issue. If the tone isn't reasonable, you know what? I'm out. I'm out. Proverbs 9:8, do not rebuke a fool, lest he just turn around and hate thee. I mean, there's no point in getting into a shouting match. And if we can't have a reasonable discussion on this, no, I will not have one with you. So we talk to each other like adults, because reasonable conversations are for adults, not for children. And then let's talk about some reasonable points. I'd really like to know, how do you determine what's right or wrong, what's true or false? What is the basis of your morality? I'd like to hear yours. I am interested, and I'd like to share with you mine. And if we have different sources that we draw on to determine what's right or wrong, what's true or false, okay. Um, can we coexist and continue getting along even if we draw our positions from different sources? You have a different worldview than I do. I'm not going to say I think all worldviews are the same, because I don't. I believe there is one true God, and I believe there is one permanent truth. However, I'm very interested in you and I having a good relationship regardless of that. So let's strive together to have a reasonable and a friendly, even an affectionate conversation while we come from different worldviews. And that really begs a serious question. Can we learn from each other? Um, Look, you're not going to change my mind, but I can learn from you. You can inform me. I can learn new statistics. I can learn new facts. I can learn new ideas. That doesn't mean I'm going to embrace them, but I would like to better know where you're coming from. And I'd really like for you to better know where I'm coming from. So, how do we determine truth? How do we coexist when we come from different worldviews? And can we learn from each other? Try to incorporate those questions into your conversation in your own way. Well, by the time dinner's over and you all are saying goodnight to each other, you're either going to say, well, that went well, or you're going to say, well, that went well, sarcastically. How are you going to determine if it went well? Seriously, you got a woke loved one, You had a dispute over the dinner table. You did your best. How do you judge it? First, how did you relate? Were you respectful? Were you fair? Were you considerate? Were you reasonably assertive without being aggressive? All of that. How did you relate? And secondly, how did you represent? Did you represent the heart of God by the way you related? And then did you represent truth with clarity? Here's a good way to kind of determine that. By the time the evening was over, did the person you were having the conversation with know what you believed, whether they agreed with it or not? Did they know your points? A lot of people didn't like what, Peter or John or James or Paul had to say in their sermons in the book of Acts. But I'll tell you this, whether people liked them or not, whether people believed them or not, they knew what they said. There was clarity there. Did you relate respectfully? Did you speak clearly? If you can answer yes to both of those, then you know what? Yes, you can say with integrity, yes, that went well. I hope you can, and I hope you do. I also hope you have a wonderful Christmas time with your family. I hope that you are able to enjoy each other, to celebrate what you have as a family. And as opportunity and wisdom allow, I hope you're also able to share truth where truth needs to be shared. Hey, if you haven't yet picked up my book, Christians in a Cancel Culture, that's what this podcast is based on. You can get a copy of that through Amazon.com. And it talks to you about how to walk through tricky conversations about abortion, racism, transgender, homosexuality, and progressive Christianity. Pick a copy of that up if you want to know more about how to dialogue with people when the going gets a little tough. And if you'd like to support our work here at Cloudfire Ministries, why, we offer resources for free. We're coming up on year-end giving. I hope you'll keep us in mind. If you want to learn how you can partner with us in that way, just go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving to see how you can partner with us here at Cloudfire Ministries. Well, let's keep in mind the job description that Paul gave us when he wrote to Timothy and said, the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle to all, apt to teach, patient, in meekness instructing those who oppose themselves, if perhaps God will grant them repentance, according to an acknowledging of the truth. Let's keep it in mind, okay? We want to be good ambassadors. We want to be good stewards. It is not just what you say, but also how you say it. Both are important. Let's keep it in mind. Have a wonderful Christmas. God bless.